Welcome, everyone, to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and this episode covers the most famous or infamous moment in John Brown's life, the raid on Harper's Ferry. Check out my Etsy shop for an 11x17 poster of John Brown with the Harper's Ferry engine house in the background. Plus, I've got a Teespring store that also helps support the channel. The group of men led by John Brown traveled along the winding roads from the Kennedy farm towards Harper's Ferry. They crossed the bridge that spanned the Potomac River. There they encountered a watchman named William Williams. The old man was surprised to be taken prisoner, but obeyed his captors by walking across the bridge. Watson Brown and Stuart Taylor of Brown's party kept watch at the bridge while the rest proceeded to the Armory building. There they took another prisoner, a watchman named Daniel Whalen. John Brown announced that, "I came here from Kansas, and this is a slave state. I want to free all the slaves in this state. I have possession of the United States Armory, and if the citizens interfere with me, I must only burn the town and have blood." Once at the Armory, the group spread out, with some going to watch the Shenandoah Bridge, while others proceeded to Hall's Rifle Works, overpowering the guard as well as taking a few people prisoner who were in the streets. Within 2 hours of them leaving the Kennedy farm, Brown had control of the Armory, the Rifle Works, and prisoners. Now it was time to liberate slaves in the countryside and swell their ranks. He sent 6 men, 3 white and 3 black, to free as many enslaved as they could, intentionally sending a racially diverse group to do the liberation. The 6 men traveled 5 miles away to the home of Lewis Washington, the great-grandnephew of George Washington. At about midnight they captured Washington. He tried to tempt his captors with whiskey, but they were unwavering in their mission. The group forced Washington to hand Osborne Anderson, a black man, the pistol from Lafayette, and the sword given to Washington by Frederick the Great. The group loaded Washington and his slaves into his own carriage and a farm wagon and rumbled toward Harper's Ferry, leaving Washington's family crying and worrying about his safety. The 6 men then went to the farm of John Alsted, took John and his son hostage and freed their 6 slaves, putting all 8 people into a wagon and brought them to the Armory. Brown gave the newly freed slaves weapons to guard the white hostages and to defend themselves with. Some enthusiastically took up the weapons, particularly Washington's coachman named Jim. Others were fearful of what was happening. Some of them thought that they were being kidnapped to be sold to the Deep South, while others were afraid of what would happen if they were caught. Brown envisioned slaves swarming to Harper's Ferry to join the insurrection, but they weren't coming as he thought, so he stalled, staying in the town. He held out, thinking that more enslaved would come to his ranks. When the watchman that was to relieve William Williams approached the bridge, Brown's men captured him, but the watchman got away, even though a shot fired at him grazed his skull. The watchman entered the Galt House, a saloon, and told the men about the insurrection, but they thought he was drunk. However, when the barkeeper went outside to investigate, Brown's men took him prisoner. The escaped watchman left the saloon and made his way to the bridge again, this time to warn the 125 train from Wheeling, West Virginia, that there was danger. The train stopped and some men got out to investigate. A free black baggage handler named Shepard Hayward got off the train to find William Williams, but came face to face with Oliver Brown and Stuart Taylor. The 2 men aimed their weapons at him and told him to halt. Hayward started for the railway office when the 2 men shot. One bullet went into his back just below the heart. He would die around noon the next day. The first person killed in John Brown's raid to liberate the enslaved population of the South was a free black man. During the early morning, 2 brothers were captured and their slaves freed. Those slaves, along with Cook from Brown's party, took weapons from the Kennedy farm to a schoolhouse where the group was to rendezvous after the raid. Brown allowed the conductor of the train from Wheeling to continue his route, which negated him cutting the telegraph lines earlier. The conductor of the train stopped at Monocacy and wired the master of transportation of Baltimore and informed him that the abolitionists had taken over Harper's Ferry with the intention of freeing slaves. The president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad telegraphed the president and the governor of Virginia, informing them of the situation, which began the movement of troops to Harper's Ferry. The doctor who tended to Shepard Hayward began to alert the townspeople of the situation and even traveled 8 miles away to Charlestown to get the local militia there to help Harper's Ferry. As the morning dawned, the armory workers began coming to work. Brown's men took them hostage. In all, about 35 people were taken hostage by Brown. Townspeople and militias began to converge on the town, pushing away Brown's men at key locations, like the 2 bridges that would allow Brown to escape. A firefight ensued as Brown's men began skirmishing with the townspeople and militias. The first of Brown's party to die was Dangerfield Newby, a black man who joined Brown to free his wife and children who lived in bondage 30 miles south of Harper's Ferry. In his pocket was a letter from his wife saying, "Oh dear Dangerfield, come this fall, without fail, money or no money, I want to see you so much that this is the one bright hope I have before me." In retaliation, the citizens desecrated Newby's corpse by cutting off his ears and genitals and putting sticks into the bullet wound. The body was dumped into a gutter for hogs to eat. A journalist described in gory detail how the hogs rummaged through the man's body and feasted on his flesh. More of Brown's group died as they abandoned the rifle works. 2 were gunned down in the Shenandoah River, while another was stranded on a rock in the same river and taken prisoner when a brave soul ventured midstream to retrieve the abolitionist. Brown knew that he had only a few options: to negotiate surrender or fight to the death. Escape was no longer an option. He had waited too late. Leaving the armory to be guarded by 2 men, he and what was left of the raiding party and 11 hostages made their way to the fire engine house. From there, Brown attempted to negotiate an escape. He sent Aaron Stevens and Watson Brown with a hostage, the armory clerk, Mr. Kitzmiller, under the flag of truce to the townspeople. The armed mob outside the engine house shot Stevens and Watson. As Stevens lay wounded on the ground, one of the hostages ran out, dragged Stevens to the train station for medical help, then went back to the engine house to resume his status as a hostage. William Lehman, who had been with Brown in Kansas, thought it best to escape across the Potomac River to Maryland, where he could inform Cook and those at the schoolhouse what happened. Brown agreed, and Lehman ran out of the engine house, but was shot while crossing the river. He crawled to a rock midstream, and one of the citizens swam out to him, holding his pistol above the water. When the citizen got to Lehman, Lehman said, "Don't shoot, I surrender." The man just smiled, leveled the pistol, and shot Lehman in the head. His body sprawled on the rock. For days, men used the body as target practice until it floated downriver. John Cook, who was helping transport weapons, went to one of the locks along the waterway to see what was happening. He had been hearing rumors from the civilians outside of the town. He climbed a tree so he could see in the town. To divert the mob's attention from Brown, Cook fired a shot, but that only got the attention of the crowd, who shot at him in the tree. One bullet hit the branch he was sitting on, sending him tumbling 15 feet. Bruised, he returned to the farmhouse. Brown and his men, only 4 of whom remained unhurt, were trapped in the engine house. At 11 p.m. on October 17th, Colonel Robert E. Lee arrived with 90 Marines and accompanied by Lieutenant Jeb Stuart. Lee initially thought he would launch a midnight assault, but he feared that would endanger the hostages, so he constructed a plan for a dawn attack. Meanwhile, Brown paced back and forth in the darkness. He was prepared to die, but some of his men were having second thoughts. One of the hostages said that Brown was committing treason. Dauphin Thompson and Jeremiah Anderson asked Brown if what they were doing could be considered treason. Brown said certainly. In that case, they both announced that they would not fire another shot. When dawn broke, Jeb Stuart went up to the engine house. Brown opened the door about 4 inches, with a cocked carbine in hand. When Stuart saw Brown, he was amazed to see his old nemesis from Kansas. Up to that point, Brown was simply known as Smith or Captain Smith, so Stuart was astonished to see old Osawatomie Brown. Stuart gave Brown Colonel Lee's demand of surrender. Brown refused and wanted to be allowed to escape. With no other choice, Stuart followed Lee's orders. Brown had refused surrender, so Stuart waved his hat above his head, signaling to the Marines to start battering down the door. A dozen Marines began pounding the door with sledgehammers, but they weren't making much headway. Inside the engine house, Lewis Washington said Brown was the coolest and firmest man I ever saw in defying danger and death. With one son dead by his side and another shot through, he felt the pulse of his dying son with one hand and held his rifle with the other, and commanded his men with the utmost composure, encouraging them to be firm and to sell their lives as dearly as they could. The Marines then grabbed a ladder and used it as a battering ram to open a hole in the door. Lieutenant Israel Green was the first one in, and Washington identified Brown. Green thrusted his sword toward Brown, but the sword bounced off something and didn't go deep. He then began to slash Brown over the head, inflicting many wounds. Other members of Brown's party were skewered by bayonets. Edwin Coppock and Shields Green were taken into custody. Brown was carried to the paymaster's office and laid next to his wounded friend Aaron Stevens. Reporters and officials asked Brown questions. One asked, Did you expect to get assistance here from whites as well as from blacks? I did, Brown answered. The man then said, Then you have been disappointed in not getting it from either. Brown said, Yes, I have been disappointed. One of the prominent men who came to see Brown was Ohio Congressman Clement Vallandigham. He asked Brown who sent him. Brown stated, No man sent me here. It was my own prompting, and that of my Maker, or that of the devil, whichever you are pleased to ascribe it to. I acknowledge no master in human form. James Mason, one of Virginia's senators, asked, What was your objective in coming? Brown said, We came to free the slaves, and only that. Mason then asked, How do you justify your acts? Brown said, I think, my friend, you are guilty of a great wrong to God and against humanity. I say it without wishing to be offensive, and I believe it would be perfectly right to interfere with you, so far as to free those you wickedly and willfully hold in bondage. I think I did right, and that others will do right who interfere with you at any time and at all times. It was asked, Do you consider this a religious movement? Brown happily stated, The greatest service man can render to God. Do you consider yourself an instrument in the hands of Providence? Brown responded, I do. Brown would go on to state, I want you to understand that I respect the rights of the poorest and weakest of black people oppressed by the slave system, just as much as I do those of the most wealthy and powerful. This is the idea that has moved me, and that alone. I wish to say furthermore that you had better, all of you people of the South, prepare yourselves for a settlement of this question. You may dispose of me very easily. I am nearly disposed of now, but this question is still to be settled. The governor of Virginia, Henry Wise, said of Brown, They are themselves mistaken who take him to be a madman. He is a bundle of the best nerves I ever saw cut and thrust and bleeding and in bonds. He is a man of clear head, of courage, fortitude, and simple ingenuousness. He is cool, collected, and indomitable, and it is but just to him to say that he was humane to his prisoners, as attested to me by Colonel Washington and Mr. Mills, and he inspired me with great trust in his integrity as a man of truth. He is a fanatic, vain, garrulous, but firm, truthful, and intelligent. His men, too, who survive, except the free blacks with him, are like him. Brown's great raid had finally come to an end, and now he was to answer for his actions. He was taken to the Charlestown jail to await his trial.